MLOps is not easy. It's not easy for anyone. And you just have to know so many pieces. And all these pieces must be moving together in a nice way. So if you are a beginner, it's a tough thing to learn. I think it's not a beginner's job just to start with. But one thing that I think is important to understand for everyone, that ML processes and AI applications are different from software engineering practices, and that you need to track everything down pretty much. The data, the code, the environment, the infrastructure. And you basically need to come up to any combination of those at any point of time or get to it as close as possible. And very few people of very few teams do it well. So I show how to do that on Databricks, based on some examples that I give. And I think that's something that I hope that more teams start doing.
Welcome to Alexa's Input AI. I'm joined by Maria Vechtomova. She's an author and she's a co-founder of Marvelous MLOps. Maria's expertise is in data and AI, helping organizations turn machine learning from experiments into production-ready systems. She's also a practitioner who builds, teaches, and simplifies MLOps. She goes from architecture to pipelines and from governments to culture. She's also writing a new O'Reilly book on MLOps with Databricks, and she's passionate about making AI deployments faster, safer, and more transparent. So, Maria, welcome to the podcast. I'm happy to have you on.
Thank you. It's awesome to be here.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about your journey. How did you get into the data and AI space, and how did you find your way into MLOps?
Yeah, well, I think everyone has its own way. I started as a data analyst. I worked at a telecom company and I was doing some churn predictions. And it was mainly in R back then. So I guess I was doing some data science work. And then my job was formally called data scientist because it was sexy back then. It was a cool new title, which is not sexy anymore, I think, these days. So back then I started learning Python, and very fast I had my first model that I wanted to put in production behind an endpoint. And there was no one really who could do that for us. So you had to figure it all out yourself. I don't really have software engineering background. I come from econometrics background. So I had to learn a lot of things, and I had to learn it first the wrong way and then try to figure out the right way. And yeah. And that's been my passion for last 9 years, how to do it the right way and how to build the tools that help data scientists to deploy models to production easily.
I love that. I also didn't have a traditional background. Mine was in chemistry, and I did computational chemistry research. So I think it can kind of be a superpower at some certain times to have a different perspective or way of learning. Also, for those who are listening or maybe watching, you have your cat with us as well. It's very... Yes. Is their name?
It's Marx. It's like Karl Marx, economist. He is very smart. He's in all the meetings, so he's listening. I'm joking that he does all the work. He's the one. But yeah, he is always there. Yes.
Yeah, I also have a cat. I don't know if he's going to make a guest appearance as well, but we'll see. So there's a few things that you are doing and have done. One of them is you're currently writing a book on MLOps for O'Reilly, and that's definitely a huge milestone. But what made you want to take your experience and turn it into a book? What was that process like?
Well, I think it started quite some long time ago. The willingness to share the knowledge that I'm gaining. And I started my social media journey around 2.5 years ago. I started posting on LinkedIn and starting basically to formalize things that I know and bring it into some shape. And I think it's kind of a natural process. Once you do that, you then start writing blogs. And then you realize that your perspective is a bit different than what you would otherwise see maybe in the documentation or other materials. And that's what brought me to the idea to write a book. I think it always has been on my bucket list of things that I want to do. Yeah, and it's happening. I still have 1 month to finish the book, and it's very intense right now, but I'm getting there.
What do you hope that is the main message that readers will take away from your book?
Well, that's a good question. I think, MLOps is not easy. It's not easy for anyone. And you just have to know so many pieces. And all these pieces must be moving together in a nice way. So if you are a beginner, it's a tough thing to learn. I think it's not a beginner's job just to start with. But one thing that I think is important to understand for everyone, that ML processes and AI applications are different from software engineering practices, and that you need to track everything down pretty much. The data, the code, the environment, the infrastructure. And you basically need to come up to any combination of those at any point of time or get to it as close as possible. And very few people of very few teams do it well. So I show how to do that on Databricks based on some examples that I give. And I think that's something that I hope that more teams start doing.
Okay, I want to get more into that. What does it mean to do MLOps well? But first, I also want to ask you, because you're a co-founder of Marvelous MLOps, can you also explain what that is?
Yes. So Marvelous MLOps, we started also around 2 years ago with the idea to bring the knowledge to the people. And we started writing blogs, sharing knowledge on LinkedIn, and also we recorded a YouTube course, and we had a Maven course for around a year where we were teaching people in cohorts about the MLOps. So a lot of these materials also in my book that I'm writing, but it's a bit broader and more in-depth into certain aspects of it. But the idea was indeed to educate people on that. And yeah, that's what it is. And now we are going more into the community mode, that we want other people to join us and help us writing articles. And we are stopping for now for the cohort courses.
Oh, that's awesome. I love how, your knowledge sharing is turning into something bigger. That sounds great. Yeah. Now I want to go into a little bit more about MLOps and your ideas around it. So what do you consider to be good versus bad deployment processes when it comes to MLOps?
Well, I think I've seen it all in my career. And one of the things that I've seen which are bad is when you take a notebook, you develop a notebook in Databricks environment, for example, and you just schedule it and you consider that production. And I guess you could call it production because the results of it still can be used for business processes, but it's not robust or efficient in any way. So because things can go wrong in many different ways if you deploy things that way. It can be that you just adjust the code at some point and you don't know anymore why your code doesn't produce the same result. It can be that the data distribution changed, which happens quite often. I think that's the most common reason why machine learning products start failing, while nothing else has changed. But you didn't track exactly what data was used to train the model in the first place. You also don't really have like a proper process, because sometimes things break in the middle and then you already spend maybe 4 hours on compute before that. And because it's just one big process, you have to start that thing all over again. And instead, if you just split it in multiple pieces, then it makes way more sense. But once you are starting doing that, you need to write modular code and, really go deep into the rabbit hole, starting from there.
Can you define MLOps and what it means to you? What are we running these deployment processes for?
So MLOps is a practice to bring machine learning models to production reliably and efficiently. And production means essentially that the results of the model are being used by the business users. And it can be in different ways. It can be a batch process that just delivers data to some tables which are loaded in some applications. That's one way. It can be that it's just used in a dashboard and business people look at the dashboard and make some business decisions based on that. It can be that the model is behind an endpoint. So there are many different ways how we can bring that to production. But the core component here is this reliably and efficiently. And you can define that in 4 big pillars, I would say. Is basically you have to have traceability and reproducibility of your environment. That's the most important piece here for me. And then everything related to documentation, monitoring, and the code quality that comes with it.
Yeah, that's a great explanation of it. So can you tell me what makes MLOps a bit different than DevOps?
Yeah. So I would say MLOps is extension of DevOps, but there is one big problem that comes with MLOps that makes it so much harder. So as I said, for any standard software, if your environment is the same, if your packages that you install are the same, and you have the same Docker image, if the infrastructure is the same, if the code is the same and data model is the same, like the columns that you have, the features that you use are the same format, then your code will run reliably in production without any changes, right? But if those things, these aspects haven't changed for machine learning project, it still can be that your machine learning project process doesn't bring satisfactory results because there can be some data drift and model drift. Because distribution of data has changed and your model doesn't behave well anymore. And it's very hard to control and monitor these things, in fact. And I don't think we ever solved this problem.
Yeah. And do you think we're getting any closer to solving it? Do you see that it's getting better?
I think it's getting more attention today, which is a positive thing coming from the AI hype we have, because everyone is talking about monitoring agents. So ultimately, it will bring us back to better monitoring tools and better ways to monitor standard machine learning models. Because sometimes you actually don't even know what you need to monitor. I think that's a very big problem that we still have.
So a lot of teams seem to get stuck between the experimentation and the process of going to production. What do you think is keeping them in this stuck phase the most? Is it the stack, like something about the process, or is it a people problem, you think, mostly?
Well, I think MLOps in general is a people problem because people define processes and you need to have well-defined processes to bring machine learning models to production fast. So what I think helps the most is whenever you define the project, you need to have a repository, let's say, with all the permissions to deploy attached to this repository via some service connections. And you need to have some well-defined CI/CD pipelines and some branch and deployment protection rules, something that you typically would have in DevOps anyways. But this must be something that data scientists shouldn't be thinking about. Because if they start thinking about that piece and it's not delivered as a service, they can spend a lot of time trying to reinvent the wheel. So I think that must be taken care of as a service for the data science teams. And then the whole deployment process must be well defined, which means that for a typical organization, you maybe just have like 4 or 5 different patterns of deployments. And for these deployments, for these patterns, you just need to have some kind of paved road, like predefined set of orchestration setup, maybe that people can reuse. So basically, whenever someone creates a project, it has a hello world actual deployment pipeline to any environment. And then it can be adjusted accordingly. And I think that if you don't have that in place, it will always slow you down.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. You mentioned earlier that there seems to be a pattern of a lot of people or developers just deploying their Jupyter models. What is one small thing that teams can implement to help have a better process like the ones you just mentioned?
Yeah, well, I think it depends. It depends on the company and what they're missing. So I think you need to start by evaluating the MLOps maturity and what pieces are not there. But one thing that I think most people miss is this connection between code, data, and the environment. Like what combination of those was used to train the model in the first place. Most teams don't have that. And when things go wrong, it's very hard to figure out why they go wrong. And so that's a piece that is often missing. And I would most likely look at that first. And then I would look into monitoring. So there are different aspects of monitoring for machine learning models, or even for any AI project in general. There are software system aspects that you need to monitor regardless, but there are also very specific aspects that come with the machine learning models. For example, you want to have some kind of estimation of model performance. And there are different ways of doing that. to estimate the performance for classification regression tasks. For recommender systems, you don't have this kind of metrics, but you have a quite short feedback loop, because when you recommend something, you know quite fast how people react on it. So having this kind of feedback in almost real time, I think that helps a lot into seeing whether something is going wrong with your model. And also another thing that you can see, well, depending on your application, sometimes quite fast, is the business impact. And that's what I think matters the most anyways, because you can have amazing model with amazing metrics and everything looking good, but there is no business impact whatsoever. And then what are we doing then in the first place, right? So these things must be monitored anyways. And these things are very custom to companies. And therefore, what we see is that everyone is trying to come up with its own monitoring dashboard. But that's an important thing to have.
Yeah, definitely. I just did a talk on creating SLOs for Gen AI platforms. It's definitely not an easy thing, something that people are struggling with. And you're right, it is dependent on the use case and dependent on the model, and that makes it a bit hard. There's not a one-size-fits-all for these type of things.
Yeah, what you're monitoring is different depending on the use case, totally. And yeah, that's why all the attempts to do proper monitoring for ML in a generalistic way, it just never worked out.
Yeah, you've had quite a bit of experience also helping to mature MLOps across different brands. Can you tell me what you've learned about any scaling good practices in these large, diverse organizations that you've worked with?
Yeah. So within Ahold Delhaize, which is a large retail organization where I'm working for the last almost 4.5 years, we basically act as a central consulting team for the brands, where we also provided some tooling to help deploying applications faster. But also our team was responsible for recommendation systems for multiple brands. And once you are deploying for multiple brands, you basically you don't want to reinvent the wheel every time. So you want to have a lot of components which are similar to those. One of the aspects that we underestimated was how different the data was for different brands. And even though maybe the patterns similar, at least the data schemas maybe are similar, the data itself can be so different that things just don't work anymore. And that's what we underestimated significantly during the development phase. But what helped a lot is indeed the centralized deployment patterns. We essentially have them on the repo where we deploy using different configurations to different types of applications for different brands with different configurations from the same place. And if something has to be changed, it's very easy to figure out where it has to be changed and how. It really helps significantly to make it faster.
So considering the data and the way that you're getting it is very important, something that you might overlook, like maybe overestimating that, or maybe making an assumption that every piece of data from different sources will look similar when maybe it won't. It's something that you should look out for.
Yeah, it never is the same. Very rarely, I think it is.
Yeah, so we've talked a bit about MLOps. Now let's transition to talking about another part of MLOps, which is, I say, LLMOps. Is that a term? I'm not even sure if that's a real term, but tell us what's changed for MLOps now that LLMs are in the picture.
Yeah, well, I think a lot is changing. I think there is a big shift in what different vendors also provide. I think everyone expanding the toolkit of what you have to be able to deploy some LLM applications. So you can see MLflow, which is traditionally a tool for experiment tracking and model registry. You can now register prompts and you can do tracing of your AI applications, that you actually know what's happening within your application at every step and what exact prompt was used at each of these steps. So I think that's a big shift there. Then there are MCP servers. There are some changes in observability patterns that we see. So I think it really helps in getting the whole MLOps space way more mature. And there is also finally the attention to the serving part, which was always an afterthought somehow, because everyone just assumed we deploy fast API applications on Kubernetes. And that's, I think, what majority of companies is doing, especially if you want to do something custom. And now there is more attention to the serving part. And I hope that it will also improve and make the tooling better for that, making the life of data scientists eventually much easier, because I think this is still an unsolved problem in ML.
Do you find that people are paying less attention to traditional MLOps now that LLMOps is in the picture, or do you think it's actually providing more support for MLOps?
I think in that it will, but right now, indeed, you're right. The focus is not on traditional ML. The focus is all on AI application. Everyone wants to build an agentic platform. It's totally like that, and use AI for any application possible. And it is useful in some scenarios, but not always. I think traditional ML is still the biggest driver of revenue and in the organizations, right? If you look at the whole AI space. So it may change in the future. I don't know how fast, but what we know for sure is that all the investments we're doing in the tooling and the infrastructure around AI, it will definitely be helpful for also standard ML applications in the future.
And this experimentation to production pipeline that we were talking about earlier, where you kind of can have a Jupyter notebook and just, send it to production. Do you see similar patterns like that for LLMs? Are people still doing that kind of thing? Or do you think in a way it's worse? Because I know that there is a lot of emphasis on getting things out and shipping things quickly. And that culture is still there. How do you see this process with LLMs as well?
Well, maybe I'm not exposed to that much, but I don't see it that much as standard machine learning, because I think it comes from a different background. So all the notebooks that we've seen in the past, this comes from data sciences. And I also learned it that way, because all the courses that you could find in Coursera and everywhere else, it was all around notebooks. What we see now, if you look at any course for, deploying MCP servers or anything like that, it's still a notebook maybe, but at least it is structured in a, more, in a better way. At least you have classes, you have modules, something like that. So at least we are, I think now there is more emphasis on building better software somehow than what you see for standard ML. And I hope this will also bring those practices back to any application we are developing. So I'm actually quite positive about it. If you look at any course in deep learning AI, for example, I don't see, they still use notebooks, but as I said, the patterns are just better than what we used to see in the past.
It's an interesting point. How do you think the job of an AI application engineer or data scientist has changed now with LLMs? The time spent isn't as much on training models now that you can get a lot of them out of the box if you're using LLMs. Do you think that this kind of developer profile has changed, and maybe this is why you are also seeing a difference in the approaches as well?
Yeah, I think the developer profile definitely has changed. I think a lot of people in AI engineering come from software engineering background, while what we saw for data scientists in the past, they were all coming, many of them were coming from statistics, physics, chemistry background, right? That's what we've seen in the past. And how do you, if you studied econometrics, you used to R, you did everything in R. It's RStudio, and notebooks are kind of similar, I guess. It was a very natural change and very natural thing to use. But if you look at the current profile, software engineers are used to write code in VS Code. So for them, I guess, the patterns that they've learned are different.
Yeah, definitely. That's something I've noticed as well. So you mentioned that you're writing a book with Databricks. Can you tell me more about Databricks, what it is, and how you're using it?
Yeah. So Databricks is a data and AI platform that has changed a lot in the last years. First, started using it 4.5 years ago. And before that, I think I touched Databricks in 2016. There was a course on EDX. to learn PySpark. And since then, I never touched it, and it changed a lot. It changed really significantly. Pretty much you can do anything on Databricks these days. You basically have all the components required for MLOps. You have orchestration, you have a model registry, you have compute for training, for serving, you have monitoring. You really have all the concepts that you need. Also, feature store, feature engineering part is also included. Is it necessarily the best component for the job? Well, probably not. I think I could come up with better examples for each of the components. However, if you want to, host it all yourself and manage it all yourself, it will be quite a painful exercise to do so. So I think what Databricks provides is all in one, which makes it much easier for people to manage. And you can go pretty far with it. So it's much further than you could 4 years ago, for sure. So it changed a lot. And I think from all the platforms that are out there today, Databricks is definitely one of the most mature ones and the ones that develops probably the fastest.
Why do you think that is? What features do you like about Databricks that makes that so?
Yeah. Well, on Databricks, I like MLflow. I think MLflow is the oldest tool for experiment tracking and also for model registry. And now Unity Catalog is used for model registry. Unity Catalog is basically the place where all your assets are stored, which are delta tables, functions, models, views, so anything. And you can also apply permissions on a very granular level, which makes it very, very convenient thing to use. So I think Unity Catalog is an amazing piece that improved Databricks significantly from a user's experience. So these two components definitely stand out for me, and they are also open source components. You can deploy it yourself if you yeah, I think these are for me definitely the best ones, and the rest, I guess you could find better alternatives, but because it's all in one platform, it definitely just makes it easier for you to use it.
So with using these tools and as they keep developing, what do you think that, platform thinking looks like in the year ahead?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of effort is going into agentic platforms. I think just anyone is doing it today. So how to build agents natively on Databricks, that's what, all the effort is going into. And I think it will make all other components better. As I said, those applications come with such serious requirements if you want to do it well, that ultimately it affects everything else, and it makes MLOps overall as a field way more mature. So I'm excited about these developments.
How do you think the recent laws in the EU concerning how people should secure and monitor their AI and agentic workflows, do you think that this will also have a big effect in the year that's coming up about how these tools are developed?
Yeah, for sure. So I think if you look at the EU AI Act, there are, high-risk applications. There is a medium-risk application and no-risk application, and prohibited systems, if you just classify them into 4. So the ones that are no-risk, there is no classification like that in the EU AI Act itself, but it means that EU AI Act is not concerned about them at all. So there is no interaction with the user. So you could think of demand forecasting as such an application. It has a lot of business implications though, but EU AI Act per se doesn't care about those. There is some medium risk applications, which the only requirement for those is transparency, that the user that interacts with the system knows that it interacts with the AI. And there is a high-risk system which comes into things like HR or loans. Those are high-risk systems, and the requirements for those are very harsh. You need to do a lot for those. And I don't think anyone is doing it. Well, very few, maybe banks already are, getting close to it. But overall, I don't think many companies are doing it well enough. And Basically, if you read the UAI Act and all the requirements that come with it, it's all MLOps. If you do MLOps properly, you pretty much follow the UAI Act. But as I said, no one or very few do it right.
Yeah, so hopefully this will, in the near future push for some further development and better general adoption of best practices throughout MLOps. Yeah, so let's switch the topics just a little bit. I know you've thought a bit about skill gaps in AI teams. So talk to me a bit about your ideas on this and where do you see the biggest skill gaps?
Well, I wouldn't say it's just AI teams. I think there are different teams that are involved into bringing AI application to production. And those teams need to talk to each other. And that's not always the case. Not in all the companies it's set up well. So everything starts with infrastructure. There must be some kind of central infrastructure team that, must provide an infrastructure as a service to other teams. And if those teams don't know the requirements that come from the machine learning teams or AI teams, or they don't understand why those requirements are important, then you may end up in situations when those teams don't provide what is required, and therefore, things slow down significantly. So the skill gap here is that the infrastructure team need to have a bit more understanding of those requirements and of the needs that come with those AI projects. But I think we are getting there if I look at how teams are developing, or maybe from my own experience. So that's first part. Then you also have data engineering teams. So requirements for data engineering teams also may change over time, because the input data and the way how we store and process the data for AI applications that may fall on data engineering teams is also different. We get more unstructured data processing that is very different than what data engineering teams typically deal with. So that's a skill gap that we also currently see. Then there is also data science teams that may be repurposed as AI engineers today to deploy AI applications. So as I said, they are often used to develop in Databricks, in notebooks, and they're not used to best software engineering practices. So there is a skill gap there to understand how to write code that follows all these requirements. And software engineering teams that also may be becoming AI engineers, they need to understand all the problems that can come with the drift in data. If distributions in the data change, what kind of effects it can have on the system. And that understanding is not always there. So the importance of monitoring, everyone kind of knows it's important, but no one, it's still a very immature space. So I think we need to really put way more emphasis on that in the coming years.
From my experience, I can understand this because I'm on an infrastructure team or a platform team, and our AI engineers are running different models, and it's apparent that we need to have certain context about the models and how they run, even though we're not applying them, even though we're just the infrastructure team, so we just want to make sure it's running. Still, there's a certain amount of context that's helpful. But at the end of the day, you need context on everything you're doing, and you need some context on the things you're interacting with. So where do you think that balance is? Like, how can we help in a sufficient way to bridge the gap from engineers and organizations that will help have enough context on everything?
I think balance is a myth. Everyone is trying to get to some kind of balance, but it's like an act that you never reach it, really, I think. Because things keep changing so fast. And you just keep changing everything and try to, recalibrate to the new state of things. But I think education here is the key. And that's what infrastructure team also should be doing, because AI engineers or data scientists or, the users of the platform also are not aware of maybe why certain changes or why certain decisions on the platform were made and how the platform exactly works. So I think that's responsibility of the platform team to actually provide this kind of education. The same goes from the other side. I think the education must be some kind of bidirectional. And ideally, there must be maybe a dedicated person doing that.
I think the communication documentation part it's really hard to get right, the right amount, the sufficient amount of context, because otherwise they get overloaded, and that can be difficult too, because you won't retain everything. You want to know just what you need to know. Finding that amount is hard.
But I do have hopes for that. I think especially it comes with vibe coding. I don't really like the word, but basically AI assisted coding. And while you're doing that, you need to give the system enough content and context to perform well. And which means that you actually need to write a lot of markdown files, pretty good, extensive markdown files. And the more extensive and more clear why certain decisions are made, the better. And it helps those systems to be an effective co-developer, but also it helps other teams to actually understand what you're doing. So I see that as a big benefit, honestly.
That's a good point. It's as what you would give to, the AI prompt. It needs to be concise. Like, you don't need to give it too much context, but you need to give it enough so it'll focus on the things that matter. I think that's a good analogy. If you were to give advice to someone that is early in their MLOps career, what habits or skills would you say are the most important for them to, build right now, even before they're looking at tools?
Yeah, well, I think they understand the philosophy behind that. I think that's important. The foundation of everything that you are doing must be strong. So not going behind all the flashy things that you see around, but understand why and think about business problem first. Because often we are going for things that are cool, but don't always make sense. So I think going into things that make sense actually and train this kind of way of thinking, I think that's helpful in the long term. Being pragmatic, basically, being a pragmatic engineer, I think that helps a lot. And I think learning things today is just so much easier than it was like when I was starting in the field. It's on the one side, it is easier, but on the other side, it's just so much. It really overwhelms you. But yeah, I find learning together with AI, it just makes things faster.
Yeah, and on the other side, you teach or mentor in a way where you write blogs and you help people to learn. What is something that you've found is often an aha moment for people? What have you found that it's a successful way to communicate with people?
Yeah, well, I think teaching step by step is very important, and layering things one on top of another. The way we teach also in the course and the way I write the book is, starting from the very beginning, how do you develop on the platform that you're working with? Because developing the right way really helps down the road and makes things faster. So how do you develop the right way? Then where do you store the data you pre-process so that you can reach it later and point to the exact version of it at a later stage? How do you train the model so that you know what code it came from and what data version it came from and like what parameters you used for that? How do you do that? And once you do that, how do you deploy the model? How do you define the orchestration patterns? How the whole deployment process looks like on that specific platform? And once you deploy, how do you monitor that? Basically, coming from the very beginning till the end, how you would actually deploy and develop any machine learning project. And the same can be applied to pretty much anything. So we are taking people through the thinking process of how I personally develop, for example. And I think that helps a lot because that's not always how things are taught.
I completely agree. I think as a beginner ever learning anything, the most frustrating thing is when people skip steps, even if it's a small thing. If people just assume like, okay, now it's running, or, you can skip the details. That's really hard for people who are learning. So making sure to go step by step makes it a lot better. And personally, when I wrote blogs and other things, I definitely tried to do that because I remember how frustrating it can be when you're missing a step. So that definitely resonates with me.
Yeah, but it's challenging because the longer you are in the field, the more things become obvious to you, and you kind of stop remembering what may not be obvious for other people.
Yeah, it's you can get to a point where you kind of forget that some other people don't know certain things and you can unintentionally skip things. So it's always good to be able to put yourself in that beginner mindset again, right from that if you can.
Yeah, definitely. That's what we are trying.
But you also touched about how you really like yoga. How are you thinking about shaping, your life, career, and hobbies, and how does yoga fit into it for you?
I'm currently doing yoga teacher training and I love it. I think yoga for me is something that really helps to calm my mind. I start every morning with the sun salutations and doing yoga like for 15 minutes or so. Helps me to come into certain state of mind that I'm ready for the day. And that's something that I almost never skip unless I didn't hear my alarm and I just woke up way too late. Then I try to do it at a later stage of the day. But yeah, that helps a lot. I know at some point I do have a dream of running a yoga studio. I think it would be so much fun. I don't think it will happen in the upcoming couple of years, but in the future, when I'm done with my bucket list of things that I want to try, I'm probably going to do that.
Well, you've talked a lot about building, communities with Marvelous MLOps and your new venture coming up. So what do you see for your personal future building community around data and AI?
Well, there are multiple aspects that I see doing. So currently we're starting a consulting company, which is very exciting. That's something that I never thought myself doing, because I think what I've seen a lot is that there are consultants coming into companies and just executing things and then leaving, and people have no idea what they implemented and how it works, and it kind of sometimes gets abandoned. And that's the last thing you want to have as an impact as a consultant. So the way how I see that I could help companies is essentially in the same way we teach the course. You come in, you evaluate things that are missing, and you try to improve and build things together with the teams and teach them how they could keep doing it without you, so that you actually leave the impact. And that's what we are actually aiming for. So I see it as a next step in education, but actually going deeper and trying to transform the companies themselves.
Yeah, that will have a great impact. I'm excited to see it. So finally, if you have one piece of advice to give to a team building AI systems right now, maybe something that you wouldn't find in your MLOps handbook, what would it be?
Wow, that's a great question. I think just indeed focus on the business problem first and try to help to create actual impact and not chase the shiny tools and new cool things that you have seen somewhere on X or LinkedIn. I think that's something that some teams find hard to, have hard time doing, and not chasing these shiny, cool things.
Yeah, well, I think that your consultancy will be a great guide. Like you said, be a pragmatic engineer. That seems to be what you'll bring to the table, and especially as a consultancy. So I'm excited to see the community that you build. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I'm also really excited to see the book, and congratulations on everything.
Thank you so much. It was really fun.
Thank you so much for listening to Alexa's Input AI. And if you want to follow along with my new episodes, writing, content, everything I'm building, you can find me at alexagriffith.com, on Substack, on YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you enjoy this conversation, it would mean a lot if you subscribe, share this episode with a friend, left a quick rating or a comment. It would to help more people to discover the show and keep these conversations going. Again, I'm really grateful you're here. This podcast started as a side project for me a few years ago, and every listener who reaches out or keeps coming back reminds me exactly why I love doing this, and I love putting so much time into it. I hope this episode gave you something to think about, something to talk about. So always stay curious, stay grounded, and I hope to see you next time. Thank you for your support.